Somebody please, they're coming home and down. Somebody give me a goddamn drink. Son of a piece, give me a drink. One more time.
Hi.
Hey!
This is, go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
My name is Mike Vinopal.
Yeah, so I'm talking with Mike Vinopal today. I was interested in doing an interview with somebody, and the first person I thought of was Mike Vinopal for his work that he does, not only as a musician, but as an advocate and volunteer and professional. So I'm going to ask him 5 questions, and we'll see how he answers them. So Mike, I'm going to ask you 3 questions all in one.
Okay.
And yes, okay, so how many years have you been involved with Hope for the Day? What is your title there? And what has your involvement meant for you?
Well, so if you want to go all the way back when I was a volunteer, it was like 6 years ago, and I was working at an alternative high school. Johnny, the founder, came as a career day speaker to talk about entrepreneurship and nonprofits. And all the kids that I worked with at this alternative high school, they're tough kids. They wanted to push buttons all the time, and many of them, since I'm a large male, would be trying to start a fight with me, and I'd be like, I'm not gonna fight you, But when he came and he talked to those kids, they really listened, and they were really affected seeing somebody with tattoos and somebody that talked like them and didn't try to talk above their head kind of thing. Yeah, he just lit those kids up in a very positive way, where they're like, oh, that nonprofit's cool, and this guy Johnny Boucher, blah blah blah, and talking about mental health is cool, and I'm like, all right, that dude knows how to get right to it. And then Chris was there too. My cousin Chris, who's a filmmaker, was there for Career Day, talking about being in the film industry. So the 2 coolest speakers at Career Day that year were my cousin and Johnny, and then me and Johnny and Chris just talked for a while. Me and Chris started volunteering, helping out at events and stuff like that. And he just came to kind of have this feeling about the Vinopal family and how we were kind of synonymous with the spirit of what he was after, right? So after I switched from alternative high school to public school, Chicago public schools, special ed teacher in the elementary age group, there was a time that just came where it seemed appropriate for me to kind of leave public teaching and see if I could take my approach that I was trying to have in public school at a different angle and see if I could have better results, because I wanted to talk about mental health very openly and normalize it with my kids, even though some of them were in kindergarten. But I caught a lot of shit for it, for being so passionate about this topic and how it was still kind of considered somewhat inappropriate to talk about with younger kids. And I was like, well, answer me this, boss. If I have a kindergartner that's talking about taking their own life, we need to address it, right? Because I can't just call sass anytime a kid is, making an assertion of self-harm or whatever, because the people at the SAS office are really maxed out too. I'm like, how can we start to be proactive in talking about mental health? And just wasn't welcomed at the time. So with that and the combination of losing a parent in our community to suicide, who was pretty pretty well known in Chicago, and the administration deciding not to address it and not make a statement at all, and they felt it was more respectful to continue to be silent on such a topic. That just really set it off for me, where I was like, maybe this isn't for me, and maybe I can do this kind of good elsewhere. So Johnny had kind of been like, hey, would you leave CPS for like a couple of years at that point? And at this point, I had kind of thought about it a lot, and I asked him, hey, what is the likelihood that we can find a way for me to make working for Hope of the Day like my career? And he was like, hey, we got this grant this summer, why don't you come on and do Beatkeepers at Residential with Lawrence Hall, which is like they're an agency here in Chicago that they basically have a residential program for youth that are in care, meaning they got taken from their biological parents for whatever reason. And therefore, I got to start getting in to the Hope of the Day, like theories and stuff like that through a music program where I was in charge. I was the Beatkeepers director to begin with.
Okay.
And Beatkeepers was about making beats with the computer, so you didn't have to have musical talent or background beforehand to be able to come in and start expressing yourself through that platform. And it was a really great summer, but it wasn't like enough to get me by, so I was like scrambling, freelancing, like hustling all the time, walking dogs, playing gigs, driving Lyft, and trying to put it all together until a point in time about 2.5 years ago, coming on 3 years ago, they're like, hey, we want you to be the education director. Your background as a teacher, your lived experience, all of those things make it like a really, really good fit. And from that point, I was able to transition to a salary and not have to do as many side job type things. And now 3 years later, we're growing. The education programs are growing. It's not just one program anymore. It's not just in charge of Beatkeepers. It's in charge of our entire peer prevention curriculum, which is like peer-to-peer proactive suicide prevention. And a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, it's suicide prevention. I'm like, yeah, it is, but you got to understand the most important part about it is that if we normalize talking about mental health, then maybe we won't have people getting to the point of crisis where they decide to, take their own lives or hurt other people. And in that regard, it's very much a mental health education program. And I think some people just like they just hear suicide and they're like, this is what it is, and it's not other things. And that's what we're after, is helping people understand that it's all the same.
Yeah, and so I had went to one of the education classes, and it was just the hour and a half. It was the shorter one.
Yeah, you came to things we don't say.
But yeah, and the importance of like maybe you haven't thought of suicide or had ideation or any of that, but like to be able to learn the language so that like when you're talking with people who may be struggling, a friend or a family member, like that's really important to have those conversations about mental health.
Yeah, and it's a tricky ground to like navigate too. Sometimes a lot of people hear suicide from somebody that they care about and they're like ultimate panic mode right away. And sometimes it's more about understanding that this can be a feature, like a super bad cough or a super bad fever or a broken leg, like being able to respond to it as a medical thing that doesn't indicate somebody's like crazy or weird or like not strong enough to deal with whatever life is thrown at them. Because at that point is where you start to dismiss or criticize or like minimize people's experiences, where that's how people get silenced, and then they don't say, hey, I'm fucked up right now, I need help. Yeah. They would rather conceal it until things are just like too dire. So that's what we're after.
Yeah, so that's huge. And I guess like the other question was, what has it meant for you? And it seems like being able to talk about mental health, that was kind of like, that's where I want to be, that I want to talk about these conversations. I'm passionate about it, so it seems like the organization has allowed you to do that in a way that is productive.
They champion lived experience, and like before I was doing their education, it was really important for me to go through this like big, thick lived experience guide that Carl, our director of operations and programming, he's very adamant about people being able to check in with themselves first and see if they've healed enough to comfortably talk about their experience without it like being kind of, for lack of a better word, triggering or unhealthy or toxic in some way for them, where they feel like they're show monkeying and they got to go up there and talk about something that maybe they're not ready to talk about. For me, doing that was a good healing process, and then being able to be like, yeah, I feel strong in my recovery now, and the more I can talk about it and share, it's going to help to bolster my recovery and remind me of the things that keep me healthy too. Because I was just talking before that we started the interview, like this summer, there was things in my personal life as well as my professional life that were creating a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety for me. And I was like, you know what? I gotta listen to myself and like some of the education I've been doing, and I gotta get back with a therapist so that I can make sure I don't burn out in this field the way that I did in public education, where I was trying to be everything to everybody all the time. That's just not healthy for anybody in any field, right?
Yeah.
So this work has helped me to keep myself in check. It's helped me to learn that there's a ton of other people out there that live with bipolar disorder, and their experience might be a little bit different, but it's like nice to find that kind of relationship where you can talk about something like mania and somebody's like, yeah, I can talk about that too, and this is what my experience is like. Because you fill in your blind spots. We all got gaps. We all think we know like what everybody's experience is until we start to hear about a different experience. So that's why it's so important not just to talk about mental health, but to talk about what it's like to navigate the world as someone who identifies as female or gender non-conforming or even a person of color. Like, it's a different ball game. It's a different type of stigma layered on top of the ones that we already kind of meet day after day as just an individual navigating the world. So being able to see some people's lights turn on and be like, oh shit, just from the simple "it's okay not to be okay" phrasing.
That is
like at the Northerly Island and Tinley Park, all the Live Nation concerts this summer, the branded tent, you can see it like a mile away. So it's really interesting as the education person to try and quantify all the impact that that's having, because there's some people that will be compelled enough to walk up and grab a resource and have a conversation, but a lot of people might just see it and read it and take it to heart and never approach the tent, but like be affected by it. And
it's a really good
cool. Yeah.
it's a real slogan, or what would you call it?
It's basically our call to arms. It's our it's definitely a trademark part of our philosophy and proactive prevention, but it's just a call to arms. It's like this simple phrase can be like a little switch for people where they're like, oh really? I can talk about how today is so shitty for me, and that I know tomorrow might not be the same, but right now I can't see tomorrow, you know, and being able to talk about that without people like putting their shit on you about you not being okay and not being happy all the time, or not at least trying to, you know, put up a facade that you are okay, because like that's just like a big part of the problem, is that people feel like they gotta show up to a thing and be like, oh no, I'm fine, I'm great, you know, like even if they're really not, you know.
It runs deep, and especially with different, like male and female, right?
Yeah.
For men, it's very much different talking about mental health. So that's why I'm really excited, like, to talk to you, because you are an educator of mental health, and you are a man, and like it's different for me. Like I'm not on, like I can like talk about a lot of things and like conceptualize and like feel, but like I'm not a man, and there is a huge difference, and especially talking about mental health, it's huge for men to stand up and really represent and educate about conversation about
that's how you
health.
shed all the bullshit of like macho dudes walking around being like, you gotta be tough all the time, or acting like chauvinist and misogynistic. Like, it really, a lot of that, and even all up to racial prejudice, like that stuff grows on the tree of stigma, and like how we just like judge a book by its cover, and sometimes don't even take a minute to try and understand where that person's coming from, because you know like this much about the person's actual life when you meet them. So it's not like fair to like put them in a box. So,
but that's the easy thing to do, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, I mean, like,
But you
it's
know,
a
that's why
social
people do it.
conditioning,
Yeah, it's-
and to undo that, to break that wheel, yeah, it takes like a concerted effort to be
Yeah.
like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna try and use this pronoun for a friend of mine because they asked me and I love them and I don't understand it maybe completely, but I'm gonna try to retrain my brain
Yeah.
to say they when I talk about.
And you may mess up a few times,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm sorry, like to be caring of that fact
Yeah,
and
just
like
compassion's so
yeah,
huge.
compassion, yeah. So going on to like, so you're an educator of mental health with Hope for the Day. What like fact is most impactful to you for your own mental health? Like what, like maybe more scientific? Maybe I'm getting to because we talk
No, for
about
sure.
conversation and dialogue and like maybe more like science because the brain is a science.
Well, the science that like supports proactive prevention theory is that like the World Health Organization, they're the UN branch that does like medical studies. They the verbiage they use is taboos, like being the biggest obstacle to preventing suicide, right? Taboos is easily equated to stigmas that exist. So on a research basis, that would be like kind of the foundation of why starting the conversation is so impactful and why it only takes one person to kind of like check in with somebody to potentially compel them to take a step towards like getting professional treatment to heal or manage whatever they're dealing with, whatever their medical condition might be. Just like when it comes to somebody having diabetes, right? And then when you get into the very like detailed neuroscience of it all, to understand that some people have genetic basis for medical conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure, and some people have genetic basis for clinical depression or anxiety or bipolar. But we wouldn't have known that a couple generations ago because that information is still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. So disseminating that information is just as important as telling people about breast cancer and self-checks and going for a mammogram every year, to make sure people are really truly being proactive in a medical way based on the research that really smart people have devoted their entire lives to, because the brain, we've scratched the surface on. We now understand that thoughts, feelings, and emotions can impact daily functioning, and that it's no indicator of somebody being weak or lesser or crazy, and that it can be just as simple as with the pancreas not producing the right amount of insulin at the right times to convert your sugar or your food into sugars to be able to be energy. Same thing goes for hormones produced throughout your brain, your gut, your all your glands, your sexual organs. Like your endocrine system is a vast, complicated system, and it's all producing really powerful chemicals that are naturally occurring. And if they're not producing the right balance for that individual, it can manifest as all sorts of things, like having difficulty getting out of bed, or having way too much energy, or having delusional thought patterns, or things that might indicate that you've kind of stepped away from what others perceive as like the rules of reality, or the things that are like reckless behaviors and things like that, where people start to think like, oh, I can do anything I want and it won't have any consequences. Consequences are a super real part of life, but when you start to get kind of to a place where you're not taking care of your mind, you can start to believe pretty much anything and be stuck in that zone, and nobody can talk you out of it. I've been in a place where I was pretty sure I was going to change how people took care of themselves, and I was going to save the world, and I was going to save all these people, when actually all I can do as one individual is impact my sphere of influence and like dialing it back in so that I'm not thinking grandiose delusional thoughts where it starts to concern people around me that care about me, and it also starts to like dilute what I'm trying to do in the first place. You know, when I'm able to be like, hey, my sphere of influence, today I'm feeling pretty good. I'm going to be nice to the people I interact with going about the world today, and I'm going to really try a little extra to make them feel heard and make them feel seen and make them feel cared for, even if it's only a couple minutes of like exchange, like as we're just you know, in a line at a store or whatever, just kicking it on the rail at the lake, you know. It's just like that little bit of injecting humanity into your everyday interactions if you're feeling up to it, and checking in with yourself when you know you're not feeling up to it, and making that conversation with yourself, not like this lonely, isolated one, but being like, hey, like for me, my partner Aaron's been amazing in that I can be like, hey, I don't know what's going on with me today, but I feel this sludgy brain. I feel this lack of ability to shake myself out of it or to put my finger on whatever's making me sad or kind of stuck right now. I always say stuck when I'm talking to her, and she knows exactly what I'm talking about, but it's not super descriptive. But I guess that's just like the bonds you're able to make with people, where like you have your words for like, oh, another friend of mine, my friend Aaliyah, who actually hooked us up in the first place because she was Aaron's boss, but also worked at the school with me. She always says I'm full. Like when she's like checking in with me to be like, yo dude, I'm feeling a little maxed out right now and I need to talk to somebody, she'll be like, I'm feeling full. And I don't know exactly what she's talking about, where you're like about to leak. You're just about to leak some tears. You're about to leak some emotion. You're leaking your pain because you're so full of this pain and you've been trying to hold it all in. And I just love that we have like little kind of like, I don't know, code words for it too, because like that just shows that you're like trying to like be there for each other when you're like keyed in. Like she says I'm full, I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about, even though like the passerby might be like, oh, they must have had a really fat feast, you know? Yeah.
So you like that was really good. You touched on a lot. We started with scientific, then you went to your own, and then just down to the nitty gritty of like being with friends, and that's really important. So that's kind of how I write a song. I kind of like go through it all, but that's beautiful. So thank you for all of that. And yeah, that's really good. So I'm gonna go switch to the passion of music. So cool. Mike's a musician. He plays guitar, and in the video I will show a clip of you playing one of the songs, you and your band. And your band name is?
Locomotive. It's 2 words. Sometimes people hear it as one mush, as locomotive, but it's locomotive. And the whole spirit of it is to support things that are going on around you, like in your backyard. Because so many times you spend $150 on a Rolling Stones ticket, we want to spend $5 on your buddy's band and like get your ass out to go support it. So it's like Locomotive is just about that. Like go see your buddy's band, go support a craft fair that your friend made a spoon at, or like made some metal sculpture, or go, you know, support your friend's dance recital or play whatever it happens to be. If it matters to them and you show up, it becomes more of a like a power for everybody involved. So
and it's fun.
And it's fun
to support and be with and all of that. So how does creating and performing music benefit your mental health?
Well, it's like everything. It keeps me sane. It's an outlet. Many people are like, you gotta have an outlet. You gotta have hobbies and stuff like that.
Gotta have hobbies.
For me, it was like more like survivalist. You know, it's like, how am I gonna deal with all this shit inside of me when I was younger? Where I didn't feel I had the language, one, because I didn't know what mania was. I didn't know what anxiety was. I had very little idea what depression was based on movies and TV. I thought it was just being sad all the time, or like not getting out of bed for a year. But you know, being able to find guitar when I did, I was playing piano from kindergarten until like about the age of 12, where Nirvana and the grunge stuff started coming out, and I was like, piano is dumb, or like it's dorky, or whatever I thought at the time. And I was like, I want a guitar. And my pops was like, you have to prove it, you got to earn it. So he gave me a classical guitar, and then I learned that, holy cow, I could figure a lot of this out using my ear and some of my favorite music and trying to match the two. And that's how I learned a lot of the stuff I know on guitar. I didn't take any like formal lessons, and that's been like a really good tool for me, in that I get to listen to music I love and then like pick up some like riffs, you know? And then it just kind of kept growing. I started writing music with Chris, my cousin, and we wrote really bad songs at first. But just like anything you're just starting out at, like you practice, and you start to figure it out, and you get a little bit better at it. Or you don't, and you're like, well, this isn't for me. Me and Chris got really into it, and we started being really satisfied with the songs we wrote in high school as a band called Fred Bando. We were the best bando in the Lando.
No.
And you remember that shit?
No.
Before that, we were the Happy Fishermen. It was really a great band name either. So after we went and had a bunch of life experience, you know, college and all that stuff, and we came back to Chicago around the same time when Grace passed away, our grandmother. It was just like we had all this stuff, all this life experience that was about to be translated into songs, and so then we wrote and wrote, and this band kind of came out of that. And the songs that weren't super like rock and roll, rhythm and blues stuff became folk stuff we called Vino. And those songs that we wrote together, me and my cousin, were the foundation for Locomotive. They were the foundation for Vino's catalog too. Every single one of them was a way of us processing something we felt and then releasing it. Like, you carry so much bullshit around with you and it like rots you out. It's like you take something that hurt, an experience, whatever it may be, and you keep it inside, and it just like some sort of organic matter would, if left out on the counter like a pear, it'll start to get moldy and then it'll start to rot, and you do yourself no favors in carrying around that pain. Like, it just gets more putrid, it gets more, it hurts more the longer you carry it.
And it manifests in like just actions that like make you mad, and you're like,
well, and you suppress,
yeah.
and you run out of room, and that's where Aaliyah's little code word, I feel full, is just like so, I don't know, it's so on for me, because it's like, yeah, eventually you've pushed so much stuff down that there's no more room down there, and it starts to kind of float to the top, and you're like, why am I so sad? Why am I so mad? And it's like, it's just a result of carrying it around. So music, that roundabout long explanation has given me the opportunity to take a feeling that is hurting me, or maybe it's a feeling of joy, and then releasing it out of me as in the form of a song, so then somebody can hear it and turn it into something for them.
Yeah,
it becomes something new, and it becomes something like that. You took that negative thing, that potentially a negative thing in your life, you turned it into something that becomes like a talisman for somebody else that's feeling the same way, and they're just relieved to know that somebody else out there felt a similar way. And it just cuts through isolation, and it also helps me to just not hold it anymore inside, you know? So that's everything for me when it comes to music, and that's why I always say music is magic. Because I can hear something from 200 years ago from Beethoven, and that dude's long gone, and you know, the fact that he can travel generations, hundreds of years, and hit me with this music, and I could be like, oh man, me and Beethoven were like feeling the same shit when that Moonlight Sonata, you know, or anything like that.
Johann
That's just like,
Hummel is my favorite.
yeah, cool. Yeah, all these dusty, crusty classical composers that existed a long time ago, they can affect you now.
It's powerful.
And that's magic, you know?
Yeah.
You distilled that feeling and you passed it on for generations. So maybe a Locomotive song will do that someday for somebody else when I'm gone, you know?
And that snippet, hopefully it will catch your eye and you'll go out and see them. So I'm going to end with the last question. What is one piece of advice for people struggling with anxiety that you can give? Because anxiety, I chose anxiety, right? Because there's many different, right? Depression, I could
anxiety is something I'm starting to learn.
Like so many people experience it. It's not.
It's a very relatable feeling, like, and the debilitating anxiety is something that like a lot of people maybe don't give credence or like value as impactful as they should. Mm-hmm. Like most of my life, I was thinking that it was like mania that was the most impactful mental health challenge that I've experienced. And starting to understand mania was like a really good starting point for me to heal. But then as I started to kind of unpack all that stuff, I started to realize that anxiety is a huge part of what I do. And that's why I stay super busy. It's almost like I'm out running. The feeling of having to sit in that uncomfortable place of letting the anxiety start to come up, you know, like if I stay busy, then the anxiety will just like kind of be overpowered by all the other noise that I've put on top, right? And so the last month or so that I've been meeting with a new therapist, I've been like, oh, holy shit, I'm anxious as hell. And like I always told people, nah, I'm not anxious. I'm not anxious at all. You know, like I'm super chill, cool as a cucumber, and most people would believe me. But starting to understand why I keep a busy schedule and why I'm like always go, 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 has been really like helpful to understand what anxiety is, because then I'm like, oh, not everybody feels like I do all the time. Like
So you've
some
just
people,
been starting?
yeah, some people like have always understood that anxiety is like something that they deal with, but I was thinking like, you know, that I wasn't anxious, and now starting to understand what my mania is, and then separating what anxiety and mania are and how they do have overlap and stuff like that, but how it's more the anxiety that makes it hard on a day that I'm feeling really low, because that anxiety really ramps up in my head where it's like I'm chasing my tail in a real bad way, and it's usually negative thoughts about what I'm not doing and what I'm not accomplishing, when I should be focusing more on like, hey, I'm not feeling great today. I should take this day to myself to like rest and do things that are like that boost my endorphins, that like make me feel like I'm taking care of myself, instead of running myself ragged in my head, being like, hey, you didn't do this, you let this person down, you let that person down. So for people that are dealing with anxiety, my biggest advice for you is to acknowledge the fact that on those days that you're feeling particularly out of sorts and you can't really manage your day-to-day and it's impacting your ability to function, is to give yourself a kind of a break, and to understand that like checking in with yourself and doing some extra things for you is going to be particularly critical, because that anxiety is all wrapped up in that stress response that's like at the core of all of us as individuals. If we feel that flight or that fight or flight response kick in, our brain on a biological level is kicking out some really powerful stuff, adrenaline and cortisol. That stuff's great, especially for adrenaline junkies and people that want to, you know, kind of have these like thrill experiences. It can be a really positive thing, but if you're soaking in that all the time, it's like redlining an engine on a high performance vehicle. Like you got Lamborghini and you're flooring it and you're redlining that engine, it still will explode. So to check in with yourself and be like, hey, I need to slow down, I need to take care of myself, and I need to understand where this anxiety is coming from. And if you don't understand where it's coming from, it's a real good opportunity to start kind of taking steps towards checking in with a professional, because like sometimes they can help you like unravel that mystery. But don't think like the first person you go to is gonna like be the solution, because if they don't like connect with you and they don't listen to you and they don't feel like a right fit for you, go see somebody else, you know, because there's like good people out there. You just got to find the person that's going to work for you, because we're all individuals and kind of need different things. So just try a bunch of things that make you feel good, so that you can like respond to anxiety and identify anxiety, so that you don't let it control you. That's how you can kind of like take back the power. And not every day are you going to be able to overcome that anxiety either. And saying, hey, it's okay not to be okay in those situations. Wearing this bracelet on my wrist, sometimes I flip it to face me, and today was one of those days, because some stuff's been going on with work, and then I had to go pick up our bass player's stuff because something happened with his work, so his anxiety kind of got put on me too, on top of my already anxious ass. And so getting down to Navy Pier with all the traffic and Labor Day weekend, I was like, ah! So I flip my bracelet around and I can read it. It's okay not to be okay, and remind myself, because it's not just some phrase that I take lightly. It's everything. It's really important. So I know that's a lot, but there's no simple answer to anxiety either. So you keep hammering on it.
And it's like a lifelong journey, right?
It doesn't define you. Yeah, don't let your brain tell you all that fucked up shit that you're not good enough, and that that you're like letting people down, especially when you're in that negative headspace. Try all you can to fight back those negative thoughts, and if you can't do it yourself, get out of your head. Talk to somebody that you know will like listen and hear you. That can be like all the difference on those days where you feel like you can't see past that darkness. So
Well, that was the last question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You shared a lot of personal information in stories, so thank you for that. I know it's not easy. Well,
Thanks.
You might be more.
I've practiced.
Yeah, it might
I
be
keep
a
practicing.
little easier for you at this point, but thank you again, and your information about mental health in general is very important. So, yeah, so in the description, I have a link to Locomotive, their website, as well as Hope for the Day. So please look at Hope for the Day and Locomotive. There's a lot of information on Hope for the Day about mental health, but also ways to get involved, education classes. It's a growing organization, and they're lucky to have Mike.
Thanks.
Again, thank you. And yeah, that's the end of the video.
Thanks, Aline. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.